Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Thoughtful Bro. I'm so happy to have you here. So happy to have my guest today, Colum McCann, an author that I have admired for a very, very long time. His work is incredible. I love that there's people out there like Colum who are really doing the great, ambitious literary work that this world needs. I'm going to tell you all about Colum in a second, but first, we are live streaming on A Mighty Blaze, as always, on Facebook and YouTube, and ultimately on my podcast, the Thoughtful Bro Podcast. We're always here to talk about what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick. And A Mighty Blaze, where we air, is an all-volunteer initiative that connects writers and readers virtually. At A Mighty Blaze, we're never asking for money. If you want to show us the love, you can just follow us on social media, tell your friends about us, repost us, all the things. But if you are in the mood to spend money, I have an idea for you, my friends. Spend your hard-earned dollars on books that bring us into the dark heart of the sea, where a handful of men keep the surprisingly fragile world of our information intact. Books that update Joseph Conrad for our modern age. Books like Twist by Colum McCann. We are going to post some links to buy that on bookshop.org. I'm so excited to talk about this book. I just finished it last night. We're going to do some Q&A, as always, at the end of the session. If you want to ask a question to Colum, just put it in the chat and it will make its way to us. So, a bit more about the great Colum McCann. He is the author of 8 novels, 3 collections of stories, and 2 works of nonfiction. He was born and raised in Dublin, Ireland, and he's been the recipient of so many international and national honors. I can't begin to name them all, but I will try to name a few. The U.S. National Book Award, the International Dublin Literary Prize, and among many, many other prizes, he also got an Oscar nomination. In 2017, he was elected to the American Academy of Arts. His work has been published in over 40 languages, and his 2009 novel, Let the Great World Spin, has sold 1 million copies in the US alone, and it was voted by the New York Times readers as, quote, one of the 100 best books of the 21st century. His newest book, as I mentioned, is Twist. It's the story of an Irish journalist and a mysterious sea captain on a dangerous mission to repair undersea cables that carry all the world's data, which are far more important and far more vulnerable than you may have imagined. The great Salman Rushdie had this to say about Twist. The spirit of Joseph Conrad hovers over the text, but here, the heart of darkness lies at the bottom of the ocean. Colum McCann, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro.
It's such a pleasure to be on with you.
Well, thank you for being here. As always, like I said, I finished the book last night. I love like a great literary adventure yarn. And one of the reasons why I love it so much is I just feel like we live in a world where there's so few adventures left. Like there's a map of everywhere. You always have your phone. You can always find a doctor, usually, if you need one in an emergency. Everything is safe. So where are the adventures and where are the few vulnerable spots left in this world? And I think you found one.
Yeah, I think that's very kind of you to say. Maybe it's not in my book, but it is in The Art of Stories and Storytelling. And, you know, everybody tells you the world is held together with molecules. Even your head is and your hat is held together with molecules. Yeah, of course. But really, truly, the world is held together with stories and good stories. That's how we kind of meet one another. You know, and I sort of embarked on this one, which is a tale that I've never told it. A story that takes place out at sea, and certainly not something that sort of takes on the world of technology before, but it was quite an adventure to do so.
Yeah, and I do want to get into that later in the show, just kind of about finding the poetry in technology, which I think is a difficult and strange thing to do, but if we're going to talk about our world today, it's sort of inevitable. But for those who haven't read Twist yet, came out a few weeks ago, give us a thumbnail sketch of the book.
So Twist is a story about I have a really bad joke, to be honest with you, Mark. I said, like, Twist is about 236 pages or $26 or whatever. But really, honestly, what it's about is the world of deep sea underwater repair of cables and sabotage. Now, I didn't know that 95% of the world's intercontinental information takes place under the ocean. I thought it all bounced up in the air in some sort of celestial gesture, and it all came raining down into sort of dark rain that rained upon us. What I didn't know is that, you know, if you turn the world upside down, you've got your Mount Everest undersea, you have your cliffs, your crags, you have all sorts of things. But at the bottom of our oceans, are 450 cables
Mm.
that they're no bigger than a garden hose, and they are carrying you and me right now. They're carrying our interconnections with all of our audience out there. We are meeting each other in little pulses, billions of pulses of light per second. It's profound, magical, disturbing, beautiful, crazy, hard to sort of fathom, that so much of our world is actually like being parsed, in these tiny tubes, and the fiber optic cables themselves are no bigger than your eyelash.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that's really, really, really crazy, because they're pieces of glass,
Yeah.
and they're the things that carry one tiny fiber optic cable can carry virtually all of the world's telephone conversations that are going on in one cable at any one time. It's a
My
bizarre
God.
thing to think about.
So bizarre. And as somebody who's, this is a bit TMI, but who has a family with a history of heart disease, I couldn't help but think that it's so frightening that all the world's communication depends on these 450. Frankly, the world depends on just 450 of anything
Right.
is sort of frightening. But like the idea that they're all garden hoses that stretch across thousands of miles underwater is even worse. And I just couldn't help but think, like, just like a human heart, which, like, you just get a little tiny clog in a little microscopic tube, and that's the ball game. It's just like that in a way. It's just these tiny garden hoses
Yeah.
on which the entire world economy and our entire way of life depends.
That's so beautifully said. I hadn't really thought of it, because it is like the the body, the body gone, body electric, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
You've got veins and you've got arteries, and if something happens in one particular place, then the blood gets redirected in another
Mm,
direction. So the
mm,
internet itself is self-healing. But if you cut off enough of those arteries, and
mm.
if you cut off the main cables, you can cut off our access to the world's information. Now, there are $10 trillion worth of trades going on every single day, way beneath the sea. With
Mhm.
current economics, let's take 10% off that. So let's say $9 trillion worth of stuff that's going on right now. But whatever, and then there's all the crazy stuff. There's the football matches. There's the pornography. There's the emojis. There's all of these other things, and they're traveling through this network of cables. Now, what happens when these things break? What happens when these things are sabotaged? And that's the heart of the novel. It follows a crew of men, who's mostly men. There's sometimes some women, who go out to sea, and they go for months at a time. Let's say there's an underwater landslide, or let's say there's an underwater earthquake, or let's say a fishing trawler has dragged its anchor either on purpose or accidentally.
Mhm.
And what these people do is they go out to sea. They find the cable close to shore. It's easy. Deep sea. It's like finding a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
Pull the cable up, and then they try to they join it together using fusion, and to bring the cable back working again. And this is something that I knew nothing about. It turns out that most of the world really knows very, very little about, except and I don't get into like theories and conspiracy or anything like that, but there are many cables being cut in the Baltic Sea in the past year, cables being cut in the Red Sea, and
Yeah.
cables being monitored by various governments and in lots of parts of the world. So it's a topical thing, and for me to go into that, I was discovering all sorts of new things as I went along.
Yeah. There's an author I had on about a year ago, TJ Newman, and she writes these best-selling novels that are based on, usually she was a former airline stewardess, and she bases her stories on kind of drama on airplanes. And her latest book was about an airplane that crashes into a nuclear reactor.
Mm.
And she, sort of similar to you, felt like she had sort of stumbled upon a completely terrifying highly vulnerable aspect of, our technology powered civilization, which could, in the wrong circumstance, quite easily end civilization, or at least, end civilization in, like, North America.
Right.
And I don't know, I guess give it to the novelists for finding these vulnerabilities. I hope people are thinking about this seriously.
Well, let me tell you something. So the cables come in to land at these landing stations. Now, these landing stations just look like bungalows. So you have them in New Jersey, you have them in Long Island, you have them in Ireland, you have them in Norway, you have them all over the world where the cables come in. And they're basically windowless places. They look like alternative casinos, if you will. You will recognize them because they'll have maybe a chain link fence around them. They'll have a camera, and they'll have a generator outside, and the generator will always be humming. And most people don't even know that these are the landing stations. Now, there's been a couple of times, and basically every country I've ever gone to, I have been able to walk up to the landing station, get in past the fence, stand over the
time out. How do you get past the fence?
Well, the fences are open. There are people working in these buildings. They leave them open all the time, or else
God.
they're torn open. And during the pandemic, they were just left open. And I was able to stand over the manhole covers, that where all the world's internet was coming into Long Island. Now, if I had a crowbar in my pocket, which I don't really walk around carrying a crowbar. I don't know about you. Do you carry a crowbar?
Not usually. Sometimes in New York.
Yeah, exactly. But if I had a crowbar that could have picked up that cover, I could have reached down and touched, the cables, which at that stage are much bigger. They're protected. They're about the size of a grapefruit, a big grapefruit. But when they're undersea, they're just the size of a garden hose, which is really quite stunning. And look, if you wanted to sabotage, you could sabotage there, or you could sabotage in the sea. Or if you really wanted to sabotage, you'd go out a bit further, where the cables go down 2, 3, 4 miles down into the abyssal zone, where there is absolutely no light, where no human being has actually ever been. And our voices, see, this is what's spectacular to me. Our voices are going through places where no other human being has been, and we know less about the bottom of the ocean than we do about the stars above us. And it's still kind of spectacular to me. And but if you wanted to take out the cables down below, you can use a rope and a cutting grapnel, it's called. And so I have found out, I don't want to freak everybody out, but I have found out a way that you could probably take out the vast majority of the world's internet with about 6 boats and maybe a dozen divers. And I've talked to people about this, and they said, "Well, yeah, absolutely, you're correct. It's not likely, but you are correct." And the other thing I'll tell you, and I'll finish with, is that a British admiral recently said to me, "Look, war. We all think that war now is in the air with drones and surveillance and satellites, and at this particular moment, a lot of it is." He said, "Absolutely, the next big war will begin underwater, and a lot of it will take place because the cables will be cut. There will be all about information and misinformation, disinformation, and so that's why a lot of people are very, they're studying the cables and the construction of the cables all over the world at this particular moment. 450 cables, not a lot of cables, and 50 boats to fix them, not a lot of boats."
Whew. I mean, we live in a world of miracles, really, and those miracles are easy to destroy, I guess. I mean, I remember I heard you discussing once in an interview about, like, exactly what happens to a transatlantic phone call. I mean, for example, interviewed Maggie O'Farrell about Hamnet about 3 or 4 years ago. And so I was just thinking, as I was reading this book, like, what was happening to the conversation between Maggie O'Farrell and I, which was just like this. I mean, I think you're just in New York right now, but she was in Ireland at the time. And I think the idea that, like, I'm saying something to her, and a moment later, she is saying something to me. Now, if you told me that that went to outer space and then got zoomed back down, it wouldn't capture my imagination for some reason that I can't really understand. But the idea that my voice traveled under the entire Atlantic Ocean and then, went to some other places too, just to get to exactly where she is.
Right.
And then a split second later, as if she was sitting next to me, her voice came back across the Atlantic Ocean.
Exactly.
That blew my mind more than anything out in space could blow my mind.
Exactly. 0.0006 of a second. And sometime down the line, it will be quantum. And we will be doing it basically, at almost exactly the speed of light. But we will still need cables. We will always need cables. And people think it's all sort of like still up there. It's not. It's all, at least for the next 25 years. It's all going to be down underneath, and they're grimy. And if you go down there, and there's fish running around these cables, and the idea that light is pulsing through is really quite lovely to think about.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, we got to stop geeking out just for a second
Right, sure.
on these cables. I feel like the whole hour could be spent doing this, but let's just talk about the novel actually. So the story in the novel is about this mid-career novelist who gets a job writing an article about cables. And at first I just want to, before we go any further, I want to talk about this character of the mid-career novelist. You describe the mid-career novelist as your narrator as saying this: my career felt stagnant, and frankly, at my age, I was unsure what fiction and drama could do anymore. I had a feeling I had exhausted myself, and if I was ever going to write anything again, I had to get out in the real world. So I'm just wondering, like, what is it about the mid-career novelist that seems like it's always good? They're always going to get into some kind of trouble. There's something unstable about the energy of the mid-career novelist.
That's true. I mean, I think it's that vulnerability, the feeling that maybe they're not going to be able to get out from underneath the next book, or the feeling that maybe someone's going to cop onto them, and they've been pulling the wool over our eyes for a little while, or the feeling that they're, the book business is not going to be able to support them, or and frankly, when I started out this book, and I put a journalist out on a boat, investigating what it's like to do a deep sea repair, I was kind of mad at myself, honestly. I was like, come on, man, you can be better. You can do better than that. Why don't you just like make him into something else? Like, so what happens if you make him into the chief of mission or the captain? Well, the problem would be that the captain would know too much. And then so what if I made him into a chaplain? On the boat. Well, there's no chaplains on the boats, And what if I made him into an engineer? Well, again, an engineer would know too much. And then it just struck me that I just really wanted this man to be a journalist and a mid-career novelist who's flaying. He's a broken man. He's kind of like Prufrock in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. He's that lonely man in shirt sleeves, hanging out the ship window. But and also, I was interested in that brokenness that came post-pandemic, and that fear that we have now. Because a lot of us, look, let's face it, we're sort of throbbing with fear, no matter who we happen to be. Whether you're a successful novelist, or whether you have a successful podcast or a great life, there is an element of anxiety and fear that has crept into so many lives. And what is that to do with? Has it to do with technology? Has it to do with our relationship to ourselves, or to the actual technology? These were some of the things that I kind of wanted to explore with this book, and for me, they're sort of urgent contemporary questions.
Well, I remember, to talk about the story behind the story a little bit. You had said, like, during COVID, you felt much of the same fear that we're feeling now for a kind of different reason. But you said you wanted to write about healing, and you wanted to write a love story. And like, although, I mean, the love story is definitely in the book, but healing, I think, without giving away a spoiler, I mean, it does feel like, the center of the book is a great act of destruction. And I mean, although these people are there to quote heal the cables.
Yeah.
You know, this is a quite destructive book in a way. I'm just kind of wondering, do you still feel like it's about healing? Is it like mission accomplished on writing about healing, or no?
No. Well, I mean, it is about healing, but I was surprised when the book turned towards sabotage and destruction. Now, I don't think it's too much to give away, because on the very first page of the book, you know, I say that the main character in the book, like Gatsby, you know, it is dead, and so we explore. But that's kind of like when you go into a pub. Nobody tells you a story sort of sequentially and chronologically. They say to, let me tell you about the time my Uncle Jimmy broke his leg, for instance. And then they begin the story about Uncle Jimmy breaking his leg.
Right.
In that way, the novelist has to frame it like that. But for me, you know, I was looking for some sort of story that you know, post-pandemic, that would be a bomb rather than a bomb. A BALM rather than a BOMB. And it became a bit of both for me. The more I explored the issue of these underwater cables, the more I began to understand about, say, let's say, corporate colonialism. Let's say, you know, digital colonialism. You know, the fact that you know, so much of what we do and say online is owned by these big companies who also own the cables. You know, the means of production, the manner of production, and you know, will we look back in, say, 20 years, and we won't be talking about nations so much anymore, but we'll be talking about like you know, corporate elements and all of these things that were going on through, that I began to discover the more the more I went through and began to think about it. But I'm always an optimist. I don't know how you feel about this. I think the job of a really good optimist is to be a pessimist at heart, like get down really dark and deep with the and talk about like there is no light there, you know, and then eventually just say, okay, I've heard you, and I agree with all that you're saying, but it is then your responsibility to vault away from that and somehow find, like Leonard Cohen would say, what's the song, there is a crack, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets through. And I do think my feeling is that you throw a story against the wall, or you got a big wall in front of you, you throw a story against the wall, that's how somehow a crack of light begins to come through in that particular place. Eventually the walls come tumbling down, and that part of me still steadfastly remains optimistic despite all the evidence.
Yeah. I wonder, I mean, I just have to observe that, though, in the case of a fiber optic cable, the crack does not let the light come through. But I understand the metaphor. And I want to talk about, you know, Conway, the main character. You know, as you said, there's this kind of Gatsby-esque Dick Carraway introduction where there is a character who's like truly enthralled with somebody, and just this person captures their imagination. They're fascinated. They want to tell this person's story. And that is very much what you get from this, you know, the narrator of your book, this journalist. And, you know, so Conway, the captain, he's a fellow Irishman, and he's sort of mysterious, and he's in love with this actress. And ultimately he is kind of a far more interesting and dangerous person than it appears at first. And I guess my question to you is, why do you love this character so much? Clearly the narrator loves them, and I actually think there's a distinction to be made about the narrator loving him and you, Colum, loving him as an artistic, you know, subject. But, you know, maybe just to answer both those questions, like, what is the fascination for both the narrator and for you with this particular person?
Well, you know, first of all, you're entirely correct. I mean, the narrator is not me. He is Irish. He is sort of middle-aged and et cetera, but is not in any of the positions that I'm in. I mean, he's very much a broken man. His son has gone from him, is living in, you know, South America. His marriage has fallen apart. His career is falling apart. All of these things. So I did have to separate myself from him, and yet. You know, part of me is there embedded in him as well. But part of me is also embedded in this other mysterious character, Conway, who we never quite fully get get a grip on. And in that way, it is Gatsby-esque in the sense that we never fully understand Gatsby, where he came from, and all these things. And it is the pursuit of one man in pursuit of another, and then there's a romance at the edge of it. I was conscious of all of that. In fact, in certain ways, I even have the Nick Carraway voice is kind of close to my narrator's voice. Like Nick Carraway says, in my younger and more vulnerable years, my fathers gave me a piece of advice. And my narrator sort of has the same sort of, a similar sort of voice. And he talks about Conway in these big sort of, sort of almost adoring terms, but it's all a mystery to him. And in the end, this is again not giving away anything at all. The mystery remains open, and it's up to the reader to figure out what she or he feels about what happened there. And see, I like this notion. I don't like sort of telling people what to feel, how to feel, when to feel it. That's up to politicians, corporations, not the artist's job to tell us how to feel. But I want you to feel something, to engage with something, and to start thinking about it in new ways. So if I can do anything, whether it's about underwater cables, whether it's about Israel, Palestine, whether it's about 9/11, all these different things that I've written about in different forms, I do think that my reader is much more intelligent than I am, and certainly cumulatively, they bring to it an energy that finishes a book in all sorts of like fantastic ways. So that the further I get away from a book, the more I actually learn about what it really entails and what it was about. Because part of the big lie, Mark, I don't know if you feel this, but part of the big lie about writers is that they're intelligent. No, I'm not.
Don't look at the man behind the curtain.
Yeah, exactly. But no. But what I mean by this is that often writers don't know what it is that they're doing. So they'll know afterwards, and they'll pretend, or we'll pretend that we knew. But in the end, really, most of the time, you're hoping that something is going to happen. Like Dr. O talked about this way. He said, writing is like driving at night in the fog. You can only see as far as your headlights can shine, but you will get somewhere eventually. I feel the exact same way. When I'm in the midst of a novel, I hate it. I think it's never going to work out. It's never going to be, I'm never going to finish it. Everyone's going to realize I'm a charlatan, and but then you get it finished because you keep your arse in the chair. That's one thing that's very important. You fight. You have desire, stamina, perseverance. Then you hope that the story comes together. And then at the end, honestly, the reader is the one who properly completes it for you.
Well, I mean, I guess the way that I would look at that is it's not, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but just to rephrase it slightly, I mean, I feel like it's not that the writer isn't intelligent. I feel like the writer is sort of has access to their unconscious in a way that is more free flowing, and they're more able to kind of bring what's unconscious to the surface more than somebody who's not a gifted writer. And then what happened, the completion that you're talking about, to me feels like that's the conscious mind of the reader sort of identifying like, hey, here's what was going on, here's what this was about. But I sort of feel like if the writer was able to truly understand what was beneath, these layers of their unconscious, then I don't know if A, the writing would be as good, or B, they would feel compelled to write it. It's that T.S. Eliot line, I think, we only find the words for that which, we no longer struggle with, or something along those lines.
Well, that's beautiful. That's beautifully said. And since you bring up T.S. Eliot, I'm going to bring up Dostoevsky. We can read.
I'm ready for this. Let's go.
Like we're being thoughtful bros here today. But Dostoevsky says something that I think was really quite wonderful. He said, to be too acutely conscious is to be diseased.
Mm.
So you're thinking about something so much, you bring an illness to it. So part of it is that, and I hate talking about this too much because it sounds mystical, but part of it is the poetic mystery of what's going on. And you do not know where the hell this stuff is coming from, but it's coming from somewhere, and you better follow it, and you better keep your arse in the chair as long as it's happening. And when it happens, then it's beautiful, and then it's gone. And
Mm.
and that's part of the beauty. I do experience that when I'm writing. That's why I adore fiction. You get to those certain moments which make it all entirely worthwhile, but you don't know where it came from.
Mm, 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 speaking of the poetic mystery, I couldn't help but feel when I was reading this, and this is just a feeling that I have all the time, that there was this story in the Atlantic that came out a few weeks ago about the there's this database of where AI has been trained on every writer in the world, and like if
Right.
you say like write me a paragraph about going to get a cup of coffee in the style of Colum McCann, like
Mm.
it will do that, and it has done that even for writers like me who've only published a single book. And the stuff that AI spits out is not too shabby. I mean, it's like sort of an incredible act of ventriloquism that happens instantaneously. And I guess my question to you about this is like, it might be too much to say that there is some kind of like hidden, submerged, striking back of the, you strike me as, very much carrying on the tradition of like, you sit down by a fireplace at a pub and Colin McCann tells you a story. I mean, you have that air about you, and that's in your writing, the natural kind of oral storyteller. But here we are in this world where it's like, there's nothing. It feels like there's nothing that a writer could do, even something as stupendous as Ulysses by James Joyce.
Right.
Compare that to my voice going under the Atlantic Ocean in a fraction of a second and coming back to me. I just feel there's a way that artists might feel today that like, like, what is my role anymore? And like, is there really a place left for me in this world of miracles that we've been talking about? I'm just curious. You must have been thinking about that during this book.
I have been thinking about it. I think it's a profound question, and I think the answer is for me anyway at this particular point quite simple. They can't AI cannot write a Seamus Heaney poem. It can imitate everything that Seamus Heaney did before, but Seamus Heaney already did it, and he placed it out into the world. I don't think that it could create something that would have the vast beauty and of what Seamus was able to do. I'm not frightened by AI. I know there are ways that we should be able to adjust to it. I don't think we should be frightened by anything but ourselves and our own reaction to these things. If we become fearful, and if we cower in the corner and say art can't do it anymore or writing can't do it anymore, then we're in trouble. But really, what I would like for young writers to think: this dilates my nostrils. This puts my back up against the wall. How can I do something really different? And I have a feeling, look, there've been a bad few years, I don't care whether you're talking about social stuff, pandemics, whether you're talking about politics. I'm not going to get into all of that, but it's been a bad couple of years. But I have a feeling, I don't know if you feel this way, Mark, but I have a feeling that in a couple of years, there's going to be a volcano. There's going to be an eruption. There's going to be a new way that people are going to discover. There's going to be some kid who comes out of, I don't know, New Zealand or the West Bank or Ireland or New York or wherever it happens to be. And they are going to astound us. And we will have faith again in what humans can build. Again, that's the optimistic part of me. I understand the bad stuff, but I have to believe that it will happen.
You said recently that it's hard to be a writer in America because it's a country diseased with certainty.
Yeah.
When I heard that, I want to hear you expound on that and see if you still feel that way. But like, part of me when I was thinking about that particular quote, I had a very similar reaction to what you just said, which is that maybe this will be like the 1960s in the sense of like it's such a time of profound anxiety and conflict and psychological stress that it will create a kind of flowering of art that will meet the moment.
Yes. Well, I believe so. But what I mean by this certainty is that everybody wants you to be, say, only one thing. The political parties want you to be one thing. You know, the social media channels want you to be one thing, or whatever other form of media we engage in. You either you're Irish and that's it, and then you have to stay in that canal. And a canal is a good metaphor because it's not like a river. A canal is man built. And it brings water from point A to point B, and that's its only function. A river, on the other hand, will have a floodplain, and it will burst its banks at times, and it will change things. I'm really interested in us breaking out of these canals that people want to put us in. Because let's say, you can be Irish, but you can be many other things at the same time. You can be gay, you can be Muslim, you can be science fiction writer, or you can be all four of those things at the exact same time. In fact, I know some people who fit into those categories. They're surprising categories, perhaps, but the more we acknowledge the kaleidoscopic elements of our personalities, the more we will see how beautiful we happen to be, and we reduce these certainties that certain powers want to put down upon us. So there's a lot of pressure coming down from the supposed above. I do think it's going to bubble up and burst out in a different direction. Look, that's it. 150 years ago, 170 years ago, Walt Whitman was saying sort of spectacular things about diversity and so on, and they were bad times. Remember, there was slavery going on, there was all sorts of economic inequalities, but he did say, do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. And I do believe that nowadays we're sort of denying some of our multitudes, but some kid is going to come along, some fantastic person is going to come along and do what Greta Thunberg did in Sweden. Going to walk out of the classroom, say, "Can I curse on the podcast, by the way?"
Oh yeah,
I'm allowed. Okay, so you can say, fuck this, and walk out of whatever classroom we happen to be in, and then a couple of people will follow you, and before you know it, the whole country will be following you, and then 2 years later, the world will be talking more about things like climate change and so on. Like, I have great admiration for her that she did this sort of at the age of 15. I do believe that there are plenty of young people around the world who are more than able and willing to break us out of this sort of abulia, which is a great word, or this inertia that we have right now. And part of my own responsibility is to sort of prod at that and push it in a certain way. And I don't know if I did it with this particular book, although it does have an aftertaste to it, I hope. But I certainly was trying to do it with, say, a book like A Paragon, which was set in Israel and Palestine, and two fathers who lost their daughters, and then using a sort of very different form to sort of try to split open the atom when we talk about things like peace and peaceful engagement.
Well, I love that hope. It's sort of like cultural Newtonian physics, that for every action there will be an equal and opposite reaction, and I look forward to that.
Are you an optimist?
I am an optimist, and I have been critiqued for that over the last decade, I would say. I always believe that this country, this world, the human spirit will pull it out, and that it's just. I just can't help it. It's what comes most naturally to me.
Can I tell you something very cool that I discovered when I was teaching? I did a class on the speeches by Nobel laureates for literature, and some of these people seem like the Harold Pinter, Samuel Beckett,
Mm.
Toni Morrison, William Faulkner, people who might be able to critique all the bad stuff that's going on. They
Hmm.
certainly do in their work. But virtually to a person, when they were given a chance at the ultimate forum there in Stockholm to relook at their careers and to rethink about what the human spirit does through the literary experience, virtually every single one of them reaffirmed the beauty of the human spirit, what Faulkner would talk about, the human heart in conflict with itself,
Mm.
and then talked about really fantastic issues of love, pride, pity, sacrifice, compassion, and all of those things. So when people are put to it, and when the ultimate question comes down to it, do you believe in X, Y, and Z? I think in the great thinkers and a lot of the great peoples actually do believe in the X, Y, and Z of things.
You know what's so funny about that, and that I never thought about it in that way before, but in my 20s, there was a period I went through where I read every single Nobel Prize in Literature speech.
There you go.
And I loved them, and it never occurred to me that they might have resonated with me for that reason.
Yeah. But here's the thing: we get our voice from the voices of others, and this is how we build things up. And by the way, like also, can I just say, while I'm on my high horse, that the ones who bring about any sense of hope, the ones who have real access to it, are our teachers, and the ones who give us access to those. To the stories, to the literature, to the songs, because the place where our democracy most beautifully exerts itself at this particular moment in time is in our schools, whether they be like the kindergartens all the way through to the high school, and indeed the colleges. I have enormous respect. The heroes of my current world are more than artists and more than writers, more than musicians, are the teachers who are at the coalface of everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're talking to a son of two teachers, so I certainly agree with that. So I want to talk a little bit about just a little bit of literary nerdy stuff for a second, and then talk a little bit about craft before we wrap up. This book has a lot of Joseph Conrad in it. It has, Salman Rushdie, and many critics who reviewed the book are saying, talking about the connection with Conrad, and indeed in the book itself, you talk about Conrad and you talk about Apocalypse Now, the Coppola film that was based on Heart of Darkness. I just want to talk for a second about the Heart of Darkness. So I have in my mind, I like to create like pantheons of like the greatest, the greatest Philly cheesesteak, the greatest, 90s television show. To me, like I have a pantheon also of the greatest literary metaphors, and like in this is the ring in Lord of the Rings, the Ring of Power, the Force in Star Wars. I would say I'll call it a literary metaphor. Greek mythology obviously is filled with this kind of thing, but I've always felt that the river in the Heart of Darkness is just one of the most powerful symbols in the history of literature. And I just wanted to ask you, as somebody who clearly has been thinking about that work, and you deployed some of its wisdom and its technique into this work, what do you think about that as a metaphor? What does Conrad mean to you?
Well, I mean, Conrad is problematic for a lot of people, and I understand exactly why, and I can see it in certain ways. Although I think if Conrad were to come back and he were given a chance to argue his place, he would argue his place quite well, and with great agility and style, and perhaps a good amount of apology for some of the language that was used, and some of the lack of sight in some of the things. But he was also a really great writer, and he was well aware of what he was doing as people went upriver, and moved towards the horror, well, I wasn't writing an homage or an homage to Joseph Conrad or to the Heart of Darkness. My story takes place, on where the Congo River floods. It's a reverse of the river. The river comes out this time. from the continent of Africa. It's a different form, and then it disrupts the technology that's trying to strangle us in many ways. Unfortunately, that disruption comes about because of climate change. So the climate change causes rains on the Congo floods, and the flooding causes the cable to break. You've got to be aware of all of these things that are going on. But also, I think you do have to be aware that, as I said just a few minutes ago, we get our voice from the voices of others, and whether it be Joyce, whether it be Conrad, whether it be the Toni Morrisons of the world, or the Edna O'Briens. Actually, here's a picture of Edna right there behind me. She's always sort of with me. That we have to acknowledge that, and we're sort of in the act of sort of constant, permanent composition, and that life. One of the other things that I love is when John Berger says, life is constantly unfinished. And no matter how old we are, we have to realize how unfinished this life happens to be. I think we have to push ourselves as artists and be aware of those symbols. And if we find them in our work, to go with them as deep as we possibly can. For me, in this particular book, it was the voices on the floor of the very, very, very dark sea, and yet they contain everything that we think we know. Now, the problem is between, is technology good? Is technology bad? So now that we're able to communicate, why are we not communicating with each other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. As a writer, you say, the voice comes from other voices. I know another quality of your writing is its lyricism. This is something that you're so justifiably known for. I've heard you say before this comment: the music is more important than the meaning, and sort of like once the music is there, the meaning is sort of given off from that. And I just wanted to ask you about that. I mean, you're not a plotty writer. This book has more plot than most of yours. But I just wanted to ask you about this idea of lyricism and kind of the meaning coming from the words and the music of the words.
I walk around my house, and I have done for the past, 30 years. Well, my kids are like, my oldest kid is 27, but I walk around and I read my work aloud. And I heard at one stage when one of them was about 8 or 9 saying, "Oh, there goes Daddy saying the F word again." But what I was doing in walking around saying this stuff aloud is like trying to find the music there. I do believe it's very important to read your stuff aloud. You'll see things that are going on. You'll see unintentional repetitions. You'll see things where it's not actually functioning properly, and yet also music gets at things so beautifully, so deeply, so powerfully, so that if you have music in the sentence, it's so much more dignified to have music in the sentence and to allow the music to stay there than to hit somebody over the head with meaning. So if I give it to you, if I give you a piece of music rather than a didactic tract, you will respect me so much more. You'll also respect yourself, and I think this is important too in this whole process. The beauty of literature is that it doesn't impose in the way that other things impose. It gives you the dignity of saying, "Oh, this is my own idea. I can take it away, and I can go somewhere else." So therefore, look, I think music is great. Don't ask me to sing, because my problem in life, and if we do ever go out for a beer, you'll see this. But my problem in life is that I do sing, but I can't. So, like, I have friends who laugh their asses off because, like, late at night, I'll do, like, if we're kind of a little bit overserved, I'll do things like "On Raglan Road, Autumn Day." Oh yeah. So they laugh. They laugh at me.
That was great, Colum.
It's not great. It's not great. See, that's exactly what's wrong. People say, "That's great, well done," and then I'll sing another one. Then they shut up.
All right.
It's important. It's really important.
So Colin, I like to do something on my show with people who teach writing, and I think you're teaching at
And
Hunter?
I'm still writer residence at Hunter, but I'm teaching at Narrative 4, which I'd love to get a plug for. Narrative
Okay,
4 is the
sure.
greatest organization I've ever come across. It's a non-profit global organization where we bring young people together to exchange stories with one
Mhm.
another across the barriers, across the divides. Turning stories lead to action, lead to change. But yes, I
Mhm.
teach in the high schools then, sort of all across the country and all across the world, in fact.
Wow, wow,
Fun.
awesome stuff. And then I know since you teach at Hunter, I love to ask this question to people. I call it the 2-minute MFA,
Right,
and that's most people cannot go to Hunter, be your student,
right.
but imagine that you could somehow distill sort of your number one or number one and number two like writing lesson to people. And what I mean by this is like something that you would hope, they spend a year with you or 2 years learning from you, and you would just say, like, if nothing else, when you leave Hunter College, you will have learned this from me, something that is almost particular to you, and that you just feel is like the most vital, essential thing you're trying to communicate to your students. What might that be?
Fire,
Mm.
fire, desire, stamina, all of those things. Look, my friend Alexander Heman, Sasha Heman, who's one of the greatest novelists in the world from Bosnia, he said to me one day, and again, I'm going to curse on your show, but I
Do it.
attribute it to him. He said to me something that I found to be, sort of a little bit just funny at first.
Mm.
And the more I thought about it, it's like, oh, that really makes sense. He says, it is all shit until it isn't. Right? And then it's like the more I think about that, the more I realize those late nights when you just carve away at a sentence and it's driving you mad, or a paragraph, and then you throw it down on the page, and then suddenly like a week later or 4 months later, if you stick at it, if
Mm.
you're tenacious enough. Also, there's another great four-letter word. It begins with an F,
Hmm.
and it's fail. The
Mm.
ability to fail is amazing. So Samuel Beckett says, no matter, try again, fail better. I think that's
Mm.
an extraordinary, way to say to young people, look, this is going to happen to you, and it's going to happen for you if you have enough fire and you're ready to go the distance. I can take a student, by the way, who has 100% of the talent and only 80% of the desire, and they will never do as well as a student that has 100% of the desire and only 80% of the talent. It's
Mm.
all about that sort of like, I'm going to do this no matter what. And I think that's
Well,
powerful.
I appreciate all that. I love everything you just said, but let me just ask you. So, fire is the essential ingredient you're trying to make sure that you tend to, and that they take with them when they leave. But what is a strategy in the face of the winds and rain of failure to keep that fire lit? Give us a tip to how to keep the fire full of heat.
Look, when things are really going well, you can walk away from the work. I can walk out of this office when things are going well. I can go play, a game of whatever, the football, or go walk the dog, or wash the dishes, or whatever else it happens to be. But if things are going badly, that's when you stay. It's
Mm.
counterintuitive. And you face the terror of the blank page, because in certain ways you're like a soldier. It's not going to happen unless you're there. And that
Mm.
sounds very, base, but it's very, very true. You have to be there for the moment. And so when it's going well, walk away. That's great. You've done your job. But when it's not going well, you stay and you fight it as much as you possibly can.
Mm.
That becomes that for me is one of the great things to live by. Just as much as possible, keep at it.
Mm.
And also, I mean, honestly, read, 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 read,
Yeah.
especially as a young person. So in these high schools that I'm working with now, when I'm in there, like I tell these young people to read as widely as they possibly can. And don't be afraid of the hard stuff. Read Dylan Thomas when you're 12 years old. Read Jared Manley Hopkins. Read Ulysses when you're 15 and 16. Be confused. That's okay. And I say that to the teachers too. Please, teachers, push these young people because they're better than we give them credit for. And that's a good thing too.
Yeah. Read Hopkins, read Dostoevsky, read Twist by Colum McCann, folks. It's a beautiful book. It's a totally interesting, different kind of book, like a plot. I have to say, for a man who doesn't do plot, it's a plot like I've never seen before, and a great one at that. Colum, the last question I asked to everybody on the show is, imagine that there is the ideal reader for this book, for Twist. They're getting it in just the way that you hoped and prayed that they would get it when you were writing it. They finish the book, they close the book, they put it on their lap, they look up, they look out the window. Tell us in a phrase or even just a single word, how does that reader feel?
I think the reader might feel a tiny bit as if they still will want to have dessert.
Go on. Wait, just extend that a little bit.
The meal is there and the meal has been presented, but it hasn't yet been tied off, nor do I want to tie it off. And that some distant time out that window on another day, the aftertaste of that meal will come back. And then you can have the dessert, because the dessert is the revelation of what all this stuff meant.
Is it sort of like the completion that we were talking about earlier?
Exactly. Yeah.
That had many levels, and I just loved it. What a great answer.
Thank you,
Colum. This has been such a pleasure, folks. The book
is called
It's called Twist by Colum McCann. Please go out and buy a copy. We've got links in the chat to do that. Colum, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for coming on Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, folks, we'll see you next time on Thoughtful Bro. Thanks to everybody. Sorry we didn't get to your questions, but I just had too many of my own. We'll get to them next time. Thanks, everybody.